Thank you very much, Rachel. It's very nice to be back, and I hope I don't disappoint with a return visit. I'm going to talk for a while and also show some photographs. They represent a small selection from the book, which has 150 of them. So this is to sort of give you a taste of what's in the book. I want to begin with the subtitle of this talk. Who were these Jewish street photographers? Born in the second decade of the 20th century, most of them were second-generation Jews, the children of immigrants. They grew up in New York and attended its public schools where they spoke English, although many of them picked up some Yiddish at home. As native sons and daughters, they came of age in mixed neighborhoods of Jews and Catholics in Brooklyn, the Bronx, and Upper Manhattan. Many lived in modern tenements with steam heat, constructed in the post-World War I period, where they shared bedrooms with siblings. Their apartments also had bathrooms, kitchens with ice boxes, and hot and cold running water. Their neighborhood blocks were bounded by schools and stores, interspersed with local synagogues and churches, and an occasional park. But since Jewish kids went to public school and many Catholic children attended parochial school, these religiously different children primarily encountered each other on the streets. Those streets had their own rhythms, patterns of gendered behavior that children learned. Second-generation Jewish kids played on the sidewalks and made their way around town on foot and by public transit. They learned to walk the blocks while conscious of who was behind them, who was hanging out in that doorway, who was approaching. They could interpret gesture and dress, swagger and style. Urban living fostered an awareness of people and place. Girls learned about gendered codes of behavior, how to survive on the street and enjoy it. In short, young people possessed street smarts. A significant cohort of these young Jewish men and women embraced photography and its possibilities. A camera's basic documentary potential presented an intrepid New Yorker with a world of challenges. How to see, how to review the street and make sense of its traditions and its occasional outbursts of chaos. With their urban smarts and small cameras, these aspiring photographers learned to roam safely and productively. As they grew older, they opted to ride the elevated and subway trains beyond their local blocks to explore other neighborhoods across the city. In the summertime, some brought their cameras to the beaches. Now for the title, Walkers in the City. The discovery of what a camera might do excited these young working-class New Yorkers. Carrying a camera, they had an excuse to walk unfamiliar streets. Photography gave them a sense of purpose and a reason to leave home. As they learned how to photograph the city's streets and its people, they developed a point of view. They blended personal perceptions, politics, and aesthetics. They married a straight photographic aesthetic, that is to say, shooting outdoors in natural light, with a left-wing political perspective that highlighted the inherent worth of working-class people and their culture. Jewish street photographers shared the experience of maturing during the Great Depression, a repertory for interacting with non-Jews, and politics that leaned distinctly leftward. Most graduated from high school, some from college. Both were free in New York City. Educated by the city's public schools, they were not children of privilege. Several lost their fathers when they were young, through death or desertion. A few of the women lost their mothers to death or depression. Informed by their working class experiences, they came to share a social aesthetic of photography. What types of photographs were worth taking? Under what circumstances should one take or not take a photograph? These street photographers were not drawn to New York as Gotham or metropolis. Visions of capitalist modernity did not grab them. They focused instead on working class people in their own neighborhoods where they lived, worked, and relaxed. As street photographers, they pictured public spaces, mostly outdoors, occasionally indoors in cafeterias and waiting rooms. Their ambitious agenda was feasible because a photograph grants each viewer, and that includes us here, a license to stare, to contemplate, to respond, potentially intrigued, annoyed, sympathetic, judgmental, even moved to action. These Jewish photographers made exhilarating, unsettling contributions to street photography, reframing the routine improvisations of being among other people in the city. To understand what they set out to do, it helps to look at an example of what they didn't do. Did that move? No. Ah, okay. No, it didn't move. Okay. So Bernice Abbott, in her 1935 photograph of the Uptown Garment District, 7th Avenue looking south from 35th Street, shows the main artery of that neighborhood that was home to New York City's largest industry. She was intrigued by the challenge of conveying the grace and beauty of the city, along with its untrammeled capitalism. Abbott was an out-of-towner. Born to a non-Jewish family in Springfield, Ohio, she initially came to New York City to study painting. She subsequently left for Paris, where she turned to photography, working as an assistant in the studio of the American Jewish photographer and artist Man Ray. In 1929, Abbott returned to the city. The changes that had occurred during the decade of her absence amazed her. She recalled, "I saw the city with fresh eyes." Streets are often like stage settings, and sometimes you can catch people on those settings in very penetrating tableau. The subject of this photo was the interactivity of urban looking itself. Street performances could not easily be divided according to formal compositional graphs. So Leibson graduated from Roosevelt High School. He completed 2 years of college, going at night. He gravitated to the radical political discussions in the alcoves at City College, where he met Sid Grossman, and together they joined the film and photo group. Then they started to learn more about photography. Leibson possessed sharp consciousness of class differences, both in his own family and actually in the differences between the filmmakers and the photographers of the photo group. As Leibson explained, photography has the quality of extreme clarity, presenting to the audience a vivid realism. Documentation of a social scene or photo-sociological study is one of the functions to which photography is particularly well adapted. At the same time, he recognized that the subject matter and all the details possess their own powerful valence, just like music or poetry. Photography had what he called added conviction. So Walter Rosenblum took the photograph of Chick's Candy Store with a large format. Okay, there it is, Chick's Candy Store. With a large format 9x12 Maximum view camera on a tripod. as a student in Grossman's documentary class in 1938. It was part of an assignment to pick a project. Rosenblum initially had told Grossman that he wanted to photograph New York City, an ambitious goal. 2 days later, Rosenblum realized that this was impossible. So he went back to Grossman and he said, since he lived on the east side, he would photograph that. Grossman said nothing. He knew, Rosenblum recalled, but he also knew you have to learn on your own. So east side, so where? East side's a big area, and I kept walking around, until I found a street that interested me, Pitt Street. Then he decided to photograph that street until he realized it was too much. Finally, he chose one block and the area around a single store. I spent 6 months there, he said. All my spare time, I'd go down there photographing. But it was the most rewarding experience in my life, he affirmed. Everything I've done after that has been Pitt Street revisited. It was a great learning experience. The Lower East Side streets were gendered spaces. Men commandeered sections of a block, while women occupied other areas. Chick's Candy Store pictures men and boys hanging out, listening to a portly, well-dressed man vigorously making a point. This could be a political discussion, or maybe just a well-told tale. The speaker is sufficiently engaging to hold the attention of a mixed audience of 6. Their relaxed postures, 2 guys across their feet, right, standing on one leg, suggest that they have been listening for a while. Inside the store, a man sits by the window holding the door open, perhaps to be better able to follow the harangue. But the speaker doesn't reach everyone. On the photo's edges, right, are 2 apparently unengaged figures. A young boy on the right seems to be balancing on a cellar entrance, and on the left, a woman stoically sits in a tenement doorway, facing away from the men. To better understand what the license to stare involved, it would help to look at a photograph that stimulated a great deal of controversy when it was exhibited. Harold Corsini, one of our youngest and most talented members, as he was described, he was a high school student like Engel, had a show at the Photo League. Head of the camera club at Stuyvesant High School, Corsini discovered the league when still a student. Son of Italian immigrants, he joined the feature group that was documenting Harlem together with Engel. One of his photographs of several young men playing street football aroused debate for its overhead point of view. The announcement of the exhibit admitted that Corsini's photos were arresting and hoped that the exhibit would stimulate some clear thinking on certain aesthetic considerations. Corsini's photo captured an appropriate topic, namely sport, but his unmoored, bird's-eye view emphasized abstract street shadows rather than particular people interacting in a neighborhood locale. Such a modernist perspective veered too close to outright abstraction for some. Corsini grew up in the city, but his photograph questioned the primacy of an honest viewpoint for Photo League members. Now I think we should turn to several women photographers. What did the camera offer them? Helen Levitt and Vivian Cherry produced rich and varied photos of kids entertaining themselves, playing, play acting, acting out. They photographed the New York City working class world of childhood with the same interest and intensity as they did adults. Gendered codes of behavior and dress guided how New Yorkers presented their public selves on city streets. Women, especially, learned the rules of looking. When women gazed not directly, but rather through a camera's lens, they could control what they saw. The camera's eye gave women the power to see city streets as men did. A measure of self-consciousness accompanied women who accepted this gift of freedom to stare at people. Women photographers tended to blend into the streetscape when they photographed children, since kids either ignored or play acted. The action and intensity of children's play appears vividly in Helen Levitt's photograph of an empty mirror frame and the shards of its smashed glass. She reveals how kids interact with the motion of the streets. Her photograph brings the action to the viewer, who stands alongside Levitt and her camera. In this photo, although she seems to have missed the main event, her compensation is priceless. No 3-second disaster movie could equal the narrative that Levitt's photograph frames. Elizabeth Gant argues that this photograph exemplifies Levitt's defining commitments: the significance of children's fantasy worlds, the social experience of working class life, and the merging of realism's descriptive powers with surrealism's exaltation of irrational desires. From the contingency and flux of everyday life, she observes, Levitt has distilled the scene that renders permeable the boundaries between art and life, public and private, the levity of play, and the gravity of ritual. Within the time frame of Levitt's photo, only 2 adults seem to be paying attention to the accident or the perilous project that has ensued. One woman watches as she strolls by. Her lips, perhaps, let slip an oops, and Levitt has quietly found her prospective choice. The daughter of middle-class Russian Jewish immigrants, Levitt first savored the power of images at the movies. She regularly visited one of the few commercial art galleries in town that exhibited photographs. In 1930, she dropped out of high school and served as an apprentice to a Bronx portrait photographer while holding down a job at Gimbel's department store. Then, at Julian Lincoln's gallery in 1935, she saw the work of the American photographer Walter Evans, the French photographer Henri Cartier-Bresson, and the Mexican photographer Manuel Alvaro Bravo. Their photographs encouraged her to move beyond the confines of commercial, journalistic, and documentary photography. All 3 photographers Levitt claimed as influences on her work. In her photograph, Yorkville Swastika, Vivian Cherry drew attention to the neighborhood where she took the picture for political reasons. Yorkville was an Upper East Side section of Manhattan, known as home to many residents whose parents immigrated from various German-speaking parts of Europe. Early support for Hitler via the German-American Bund flourished in the neighborhood. One could watch brown-shirted Nazis marching down the streets of Yorkville in the 1930s and black-shirted fascists meeting in the Italian section of East Harlem. Those years saw pro-Hitler rallies and marches as well as violence against local Jewish shopkeepers. Cherry's title reminded viewers that this was not a random swastika on a wall expressing anti-Semitism. It was specifically linked to New York Nazi sympathizers. It brought to consciousness not only the enemy that the United States had defeated in the recent war, but also the anti-Semitism that had constrained the lives of Jewish New Yorkers. Anti-Semitism prevented them from living in certain neighborhoods, denied them job opportunities in whole industries, such as communications, and restricted their admissions to private universities and medical schools. From the swastika in Cherry's photo, the violence cascades upon the children in descending order, from boy with stick to boy with gun, to boy with schoolwork caught off balance, to boy sitting, and ends with boy on his knees. Yorkville was not unfamiliar territory for Vivian Cherry. She grew up near Yorkville in East Harlem, at that time mostly a Jewish and Italian neighborhood. When she started out as a photographer like Rosenblum, she took classes with Rosenblum. So, one more. I'm sorry, the depth of this. Okay. One warm summer day, Sonia Handel-Meyer walked by the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, or HIAS, located on Lafayette Street in the former Astor Library. She saw the sign and peered through a gate. It looked so interesting. So she walked in, and it was more interesting than I thought, she recalled. She started to take pictures of the people, such as a photograph of several women, some with young children. The women standing around, including one who appears to be talking, may be using the opportunity while waiting to discuss domestic responsibilities. Their gendered roles and responsibilities for children prompt conversation, unlike the men, who appear to have less reason to converse. Behind the railing, some men grip the iron bars. Their posture suggests a measure of boredom and perhaps frustration. Visually, the men behind the railings and the women in the foreground give the photograph a compelling and slightly disturbing quality. Pius, founded to assist Jewish immigrants to the U.S., helped Holocaust survivors and refugees after the war. Handelman Meyer knew the organization's purpose. So I took pictures, Handelman Meyer reported. Not one person asked me what I was doing. Why are you here? What are you doing here? Nothing. A couple of people smiled. Their seeming passivity surprised her. It was weird. I took pictures. I said goodbye to no one. Nobody else. Her memories address the gulf that existed between these new Americans, as Jews optimistically called them, and New York Jews, even those who were conscious of the political dimensions of the Holocaust and empathetic with its human costs, as Handelman Meyer was. She grew up in New York City, the youngest child of a family of 5 daughters. She was also a member of the first graduating class of the newly opened Queens College. Although her sister gave her a camera upon graduation from high school, she only discovered the New York photo booth during World War II. So, city ordinances call the form of spending time in the open for no apparent reason loitering, and forbade it. Stenciled signs on walls, windows, and doors proclaim no loitering, usually to no effect. Still, the ordinances allow police to stop and interrogate people who are out on the street with no apparent purpose. Reformers have long observed city people loitering on busy corners, hanging around candy stores and bars, and drinking soda pop on stoops, and have passed a judgment, the gist of which is, this is deplorable. Photographers demurred. They often picture these groups, rarely presenting them in a threatening or negative light. Rebecca Lepkoff's photographs of clusters of people on the street exemplify that mode of presentation. In this photograph, a young woman standing by a local store, wistfully gazing up the block, her purse tucked securely under her arm, provides an almost romantic view of hanging out. Beside the woman, 2 boys plunk themselves in the doorway, one drinking soda pop, just as in Jacob's characterization of the woman's ire. 2 boys standing by contrast, 2 women sit on the bench outside the shop, engaged in conversation. They do not appear to be involved in the drama of longing expressed in the young woman's body language. Neither does the man who is facing the seated women, arms akimbo. I think the play of light and shadow on the plate glass gives the scene a slightly dreamy quality, amplifying the young woman's yearning look. It's almost as if the city street embraced her eager expectation. This combination of movement and pause depicts the texture of a working class neighborhood, where people regularly hung out. Loitering was integrated into the action and stasis of the street. The tolerance, the room for great differences among neighbors, writes activist, urbanist Jane Jacobs, she was the person I previously quoted, are possible and normal in intensely urban life, but only, she warns, when streets of great cities have built-in equipment, allowing strangers to dwell in peace together on civilized but essentially dignified and reserved terms. Loitering often facilitated just those terms, as Jacobs knew. It could also make those deemed an unwelcome presence, especially blind men, feel pressure to leave the neighborhood. Tolerance of difference had its limits. Now let's leave the city streets and go to the beach. Coney Island drew cross-section of diverse visitors. For Harold Feinstein, who was born in Brooklyn, Coney Island was his local beach. As he later said, "I love Coney Island, where it's all hanging out." For Feinstein, Coney Island was a true spectacle of what America was. His photographer's eye caught the many forms of leisure pursued by the individual men and women, boys and girls, who sprawled pell-mell across the sand. Despite the crush of people and the absence of any privacy, the beach loosened inhibitions. It was a place not only to take off from street clothes, but also to engage in private forms of intimacy in public. Couples lay next to each other on the sand. They embraced among strangers. Teenagers fooled around. Parents coddled children and played with them as though they were in the comforts of home. Here were the tangled masses, happy to be free. "Hey, mister, take my photo." That's the quote. Feinstein complied. He shot a teenage group lying next to each other and all over each other. He invited their smiles by wading into the mashup and shooting downward. His presence hovers in the reflection of the large sunglasses, you can see it, left lens. Most of the boys pretend to ignore him, but one couple offers up big grins. She's wearing street clothes, while the boys have stripped to varying degrees. Her modesty suggests some of the complications of Coney's freedoms for young women. Years later, when the photograph was published in Life magazine, her nephew saw it and wrote to Feinstein. "She is even more beautiful today," he assured the Life. She was 17 then. Feinstein was 18. Bruce Davidson was 25 when he first went to Coney Island, an Army veteran and an experienced photographer, having started taking pictures as a boy. He grew up in his mother's childhood home in the Chicago suburb of Oak Park after his parents' divorce. Davidson received a camera, an Argus 35mm, for his bar mitzvah, a gift from his uncle. Photography accompanied Davidson during his college years. After Army service in Europe, Davidson made New York City his home. Reading about a skirmish in Brooklyn's Prospect Park, Davidson decided to find the gang and enter the cool world of their lives. In 1959, he adopted an ethnographic stance with the teenagers. He would be a participant observer. One of his Coney Island photographs captures a girlfriend sitting separately from the boyfriend. Both stare into Davidson's camera as though somewhat annoyed. Although Davidson hung with the gang, attitudes toward having the photograph had started to shift by 1959. A kind of wariness toward photographers gradually displaced the widespread embrace of cameras on the beach, characteristic of previous decades. Thinking back on his experience, Davidson admitted that in general, the gang members were largely indifferent to him. I soon realized that I, too, was feeling some of their pain. In staying close to them, I uncovered my own feelings of failure, frustration, and rage. Coney Island, for all its vaunted pleasures and promises of intimacy, did not assuage those feelings. Elements of Davidson's ambivalence reappear in a photograph by Leo Levinstein. Like Davidson, Levinstein was an out-of-towner coming to New York after World War II following his military service. He had grown up in an Orthodox Jewish home in a small town in West Virginia, and then as a teenager in Baltimore. Unlike Davidson, he did not get his first camera until he was 30. He started to explore the dimensions of photography when he arrived in New York City. Levinstein took classes with Sid Grossman, absorbing Grossman's vision of photography, but not his radical politics. Photography can be expressive of the strongest human feelings, Grossman explained, including those of the photographer himself. Here, Levinstein captures the power of a male gaze. Two young men look at two women wearing straw hats and scarves on their heads. The men's tattooed arms and bare torsos invite hunger. One man is speaking to one of the women. The formidable stare of a seated man, a cigarette in his mouth, emphasizes the circulation of looks. The photo historian Bob Shames observes many of these encounters between the sexes that Levinstein caught are confined to looking, whether mutual or guardedly one-sided. In some of these photographs, he adds, Levinstein portrays the aggressiveness of the male gaze, while apparently acknowledging his own voyeurism as well. Levinstein used a twin reflex camera, the Rolleiflex. He cropped the square negative in the dark room. The twin lens reflex allowed him to point his camera sideways while facing away, right, from what he was looking at and looking down, writes Max Cosmo. It was a strategy that he thought permitted him to maneuver into point-blank range without causing suspicion. Levinstein did not seek to interact with the individuals with whom he photographed, rejecting any mutuality fostered by the other street photographers with the people they photographed. He preferred to work furtively. He was a big man, over 6 feet tall, yet all the photographers who knew Levinstein remarked on his uncanny ability to go unnoticed in the middle of a crowd or in the midst of a tense situation and photograph unobtrusively. In this picture, the seated man looks directly at Levinstein, and, of course, at anyone viewing the picture. His glare emphasizes the power of looking, engaged not just by photographers at Coney Island, but potentially by anyone. There were other forms of looking back at the photographer, such as those produced by plate glass windows. Such forms of display enticed Lisette Modell, not to buy, but to look. What she saw reflected in these windows entranced her. Modell understood a photograph as a projection of the material world and a way of exploring its underlying social relations. The photograph shows familiar aspects of our social world, Sarah Blair writes, only to demand we confront what is unknown, mysterious, or otherwise obscured by our conventions or inhabiting it. Modell reframed the photograph as providing an occasion to probe the effects of the actual state of human understanding. Photographs offered a tool for making usable histories and enhancing self-consciousness. An immaterial version of what surrounds us, she wrote. The image makes it possible for the viewer to be receptive to social and existential truths projected within it. Soon after arriving in New York in 1938, Modell started to take a series of photographs under the rubric of reflections. The term referred not only to the power of plate glass to invite looking inside while standing outside, seeing both simultaneously, but also to a kind of contemplation of aspects of city life. Modell conjures an external projection of an internal world, argues the curator and scholar Lisa Post-Stedberg. And in this photograph, taken on the Lower West Side of Manhattan, dominated by railroad terminals and wholesale marketing, features a man's hatted head near the top of the photograph, complemented by a hat sale at the bottom. The store's two bays of plate glass frame a recessed entryway, encouraging a potential customer to wander partway into the store to view its sheets and towels as well as clothes without actually entering. But a large S occupies the man's face, transforming his gaze into the store window and hinting at a dollar sign. To Hostetler, the objects seem to be thoughts dancing in his head. At the same time, Modell's photograph presents key elements of the street itself, a vertical signpost for a hotel on the left, and massive pointed towers of Starin's ferry building for railroad freight on the right. These features identify the place. She presents a new way to look upon commerce, not simply as a transaction of selling and buying, but as a complex seduction. Looking at these photographs, after decades have passed, involves a necessary struggle to understand what social knowledge operates in. What seems transparent to the eye may turn opaque under the scrutiny of the mind, the scholar Hannah Trachtenberg observes. What happens when the photographer's eye becomes transparent? So Helen Levitt in this photograph found just what she was seeing. It's a powerful scene of 4 men waiting and 1 girl watching the whole scene from the window. Although the figures stand and sit together, as Levitt composes the image, they gaze away in separate directions and seem to confront the camera as if it were an intruder like Rebecca Zurier. Only the girl looking through the window seems to greet the photographer with interest. Perhaps she is a stand-in for the photographer. From the safety of her home, she eyes the world, metaphorically representing the female gaze. Levitt makes visible the gendered character of the streets, an important form of social knowledge. Street performance intrigued Levitt. 4 men hang out. 2 of them are sitting, watching some unseen activity, apparently insufficiently interesting for them not to pay attention to the photographer at this moment. A 3rd fellow is standing, cigarette between his fingers, eyes gazing beyond the picture frame. His elegant attire is striking, especially in contrast to the 2 older men in their shirt sleeves. Then there's the guy with his back to the photographer. Has he had enough? His jacket is off. Maybe he doesn't want his picture taken. His portrait among the foursome of someone who apparently declines the camera sparks a question. Why portray this gestural moment? Perhaps the young girl in the window is wondering about the turned-around man too, for she seems to be watching him and the photographer. She has composed herself perfectly, chin comfortably on her hand, finger at the edge of her mouth, her elbow cradled in her other hand. The photographer watches, but the men look away. We see what we see, not because these things were there to be seen by us, but because the camera was there to construct exactly this view, Trachtenberg reiterates. Another Levitt hammers home his point. This one catches Levitt's interaction with the men. The young man in the undershirt is talking to her, as is the tall, well-dressed guy. The older man looks at her with an expression of amusement. Only the little girl seems to be indifferent to the exchange going on between Levitt and the men. The photograph appears more like a family snapshot. One could imagine the dialogue. Why do you want me to pose for you? What do you have in mind? It's great that you're a photographer, though I'm not sure that's a thing for a girl to do. Okay, I'll turn around. Fine, I'll look off down the block. And then we get a powerful, classic image of hanging out on a city street. But perhaps the second picture followed the classic image. The guy turned around. Did you get it? He asks. Levitt's family didn't really understand what it meant to be a photographer until she had an exhibit in the Museum of Modern Art in 1943. Then they traveled to Manhattan to see the show and were suitably impressed with the locale. Social knowledge is what the picture offers, what we passers-by can know of the scene's interior reality through the camera. A situation made even more complicated by the passage of time and distance from the New York City of the 1940s. Thank you. Turn the lights on now. Is this still going to be recorded?
It's still recording.
Should I stop?
You can keep it on if you'd like.
I guess we've got some time for questions or thoughts.
Yeah.
Thank you for your talk. The 11th photo, this one over here, which, when I first saw it, I thought it was a photograph of a jazz band. Because the railings, the banister, those would be as good as the trombones, and
This one or the earlier one?
oh, it was in the early one.
Yeah.
I thought it was a trombone.
Oh, the real.
And then let's say the subject of this, the guy with the hat, he looks like he belongs in a jazz club. That's a thought.
Yeah, it could be. I think actually he was irrelevant. I think he was an uncle, but I'm not sure.
He was one.
An uncle of Levitt, but I'm not sure. I think this was taken in Brooklyn, Bensonhurst, which is where she grew up. But I don't
No,
know.
I'm not saying that it is. I'm just saying that this is what came to mind.
That's what came to mind, jazz band. Yeah. Other comments? Yes.
Comment, some irony here. You mentioned the African Americans of not hanging out on the corners in front of candy shops because I guess there was prejudice and maybe people were afraid of them or whatever. But you mentioned there's very few in the pictures. What I wanted to mention was it was very different in the South when I grew up. Dad got me an Instamatic camera, cost $5 when I was 11. Today's money would be about $45. You couldn't focus it, you couldn't adjust it for light, it didn't have any ASA. But basically, you look through the hole, you went collecting whatever was there, that's what you got. It was a common thing. I used to like to take pictures of train stations. Go around my bike, North Miami, other places in Miami, snap pictures of train stations. There's a recurring theme in the train stations. A bunch of black men hanging outside.
Yeah.
The reason they supposedly in the South was, one, it was very hot, they didn't have air conditioning, and two, it was a way to socialize and to keep up. A lot of these were retired railroad workers, but that would not cause anybody to call the police or to, be alarmed. That was just the way Southern society was. I just want to mention it.
I have pictures of, there are pictures of black men in the book, which I didn't include. So this is one of the guys standing on 23rd Street, right? Taken in the early 50s while they were stepping. And there's a limit to how much you can talk about. And there's also a great photograph, since you mentioned train stations, the bus station, of people waiting in bus stations. So, one chooses in a talk of 45 minutes to what it is you can picture, but you're right. In those public places were places where people could indeed hang out and be comfortable hanging out. Yeah. And obviously in black neighborhoods, black people hang out. Yeah.
I understand from your presentation that they were taking a new approach to photography, or a different approach to photography. How were they received in their day? Or how do people respond?
Well, it depends. I mean, I mentioned that Levin had a exhibit at the Museum of Modern Art, but that was relatively unusual. At the Photo League, they had an exhibition space, so they put on exhibits there. They also used public libraries. The New School had regular exhibit spaces. The Engel worked after, well, before he was drafted, he worked for a newspaper, a daily newspaper in New York called PM, which had a lot of photographs and saw photographs as part of its reporting. He wasn't the only one from the Photo League. Leipzig also worked there. Weegee is the most famous of the photographers who worked at PM. And what was unusual about PM is that they gave credit to the photographers with their photographs. So it really varied. Cherry worked for magazines for a while. The reception of their work was quite diverse, is what I could say. Yeah. Sonia Engelman Meyer, for example, never did really have any shows. Not until much, much later in life. She sort of restarted.
You talk a lot about like the white man's ability to stare, or like the gaze, and like compared to how women were able to how that relates to like men and women differences. Obviously, a lot has changed since then, and it's often grown up, and I think that's not something that I've ever really
of looking. And certainly in those years, and really I think for young women even today, they're aware when they walk city streets of who's looking at them. Catcalls were very common then also. Men commenting on women as they walk by. And so the way in which the woman is walking in that angle photograph is really typical of how you do it. Because if she had turned to look at him, he would have taken that as an invitation to something that she didn't want. So I do think, it's hard to know. I should ask my granddaughter, to be honest, whether she did, because she's, 16, whether an attractive young woman, can she walk the streets and not have people make comments on her in New York? I have to check.
But not
Okay. Okay. All right. So I think, it's somewhat changed, but, maybe not Apple so much. One of the things I will tell you, though, is when you reach a certain age, suddenly, as a woman, you're free to walk the streets. Because you don't get any looks, and you don't get any catcalls, and it's like, whoa, that's when you have become invisible. Oh,
One of the rewards of
in the
age.
30s.
One of the rewards of age.
It's fascinating.
So that could be considered a microaggression.
Nowadays,
A young lady too long.
it could. That doesn't mean it doesn't, nobody's out to police it. And I don't know whether you police yourself.
They're definitely do.
Okay.
Especially like, say I'm a freshman here, but let's say it's like, I realize I don't existed. I've been like, all right, focus on your priorities. Don't let look at the ones that if you give me my life, I'll stay around. Otherwise, I please myself. So I'll be right now.
Okay, well that's very good. So
Well, if the mindset's there, the actions don't always align.
Okay. I think that's really valuable. Yes, sir.
Thanks for the talk. I had kind of an odd question, but I just love looking at the photos. It reminded me of photos and films of Berlin in the 20s.
Yeah.
My question is sort of this. We like the photos because we believe what we see. When someone sets up their tripod or something in front of the drugstore with that many gates just to get the right combination of things, we not only believe what we see, but we believe what went into it. And my question is, I don't know anything about current photography, but is this a bygone age? Because we cannot believe what we see anymore. At least the technology exists to alter photographs to the point where we just can't believe it anymore. I guess it's still art. But there's a question I know somewhere.
No. Okay. I mean, first of all, I think people, certainly Berlin in the 20s, people, experimented with various things with photography, with shadows, with montage, with various forms of manipulation. And these Jewish photographers around the photo league rejected that kind of photography. So there's a tendency, certainly, I believe what I'm seeing in these photographs, because I know about the ways in which they cared about not manipulating their photos. And it was part of their aesthetic. You could manipulate photos back then. And what's interesting, about these photos is that these are not using photos as a weapon. These are not using, both the communists and the fascists used photos that way and did manipulate them. And these men and women were aware of that. They were left-wing, but they didn't take those kinds of photos. You know, none of the heroic shots of below people. So they're a really interesting cluster of people at the time when there are competing versions of what you do with photography that existed. So, is it that different from now? Yes and no. You know, I think the manipulation of photographs has happened, you know, consistently across time, where people, you know, get erased from photos, and it's different. I think in this case, I feel really confident that these photos, you know, do represent what they saw, because of who these photographers were, what their aesthetic was, what their politics were, you know, how they cared about their photos. Yeah.
I didn't see any pictures of the religious Jews.
Right.
Sacred communities, nor did I see any black communities, the ones you showed in the book.
So there are plenty of pictures of blacks in Harlem and a number of them on the island and other places, etc. You're right about Hasidic Jews. These photographers were not interested in them. They were there. Right? They could have taken pictures in Williamsburg, the Lower East Side of Orthodox Jews, but they were not interested. Occasionally, when they take some pictures, they tend to be, like, say, outside a synagogue. Rosenblum took pictures outside. Synagogue, people congregating and stuff. They're rather boring pictures. And, you know, so I didn't choose to put them in the book. But by and large, they're not interested. They're also not interested in churches. They don't take pictures of Easter parades. They don't take pictures of the kinds of church celebrations. The only church-related imagery that they take on the Italian street festivals, that they take pictures of. But they're taking pictures as much of the games of chance as they are of the procession where the saint is being honored.
So what provoked your interest into this area of art? What about street photography really appealed to you?
That's a good question. So I have written about New York City, and I grew up in New York City. So I know the city both as a scholar and as someone who lived there. So I came to thinking about photography initially as a means of documenting the history of New York City. Right? So then I wasn't quite as interested in particular type of photograph and whatnot. I wanted pictures of people working. That's another thing they don't take pictures of. You don't see pictures of men, you know, shoveling and drilling, and there was a lot of construction going on, funded by the federal government in the late 30s. They could have taken those pictures. So I was also interested, however, in the Jewish dimension, right? Because these are these young Jewish photographers, and there's a way in which they're seeing the world and they're asking us to look at the world is a kind of Jewish engagement with it. There's a great quote I have in the book from N.J. Jaffe. He takes pictures of a street market in Bronxville, which is a working class section of Brooklyn. And, you know, he says, when he took pictures of these street vendors, you know, it was a way of ennobling their existence, and at the same time of ennobling his own existence. And, you know, that's part of what really drew me to it, where I see the sort of the Jewish dimensions of what this is. And it's really interesting, you know, what they don't take pictures. There are choices. Do you take pictures?
I do, yeah.
Yeah. Think about, you know, what draws you to yeah.
On the note of what they don't take pictures of, understand the concept of the street photography, but because these are so intimate, and I was actually shocked how intimate these photographs are, and both taken by men and women. So I wonder if not an analogy, the same artists took also indoors family shots, because the only indoors, as you said in the book, are inside the cafes, and they
Yeah, or waiting rooms.
right, and they're actually not that like a lot of them are lonely individuals over their cup. They're actually less engaging with one another
Yeah.
than so was this like a decision that this group made not to take family scenes, not necessarily of their own family?
So, I mean, that's a really good question. The group that goes up to Harlem does take some indoor shots. This was under Aaron Siskins, who was the head of what was called the feature group. And there were like half a dozen photographers, you know, together. They do sociological research and stuff, and they do go inside. There's a picture of a guy sleeping. There's a picture of a mother feeding a child in a very modest kitchen. There's, you know, there are pictures that we associate sort of more with the Jacob Riis kind of photographs, which are designed to promote social change and look at how people are living. A number of these photographs have been criticized today for the outsider's gaze, right? Especially white man's gaze on these. Most of these photographers didn't take pictures inside. I mean, if you're committed to taking pictures with available light, you know, the insides were, especially where they lived, were relatively dark. And you know, these were small apartments, which is why there's so much happening on the street. Because, you know, the kids weren't expected to play inside. There was no room. Right? You come home from school, you go outside. Inside was for eating and sleeping.
I'm really struck from the technical perspective of the composition that it's actually very traditional, because virtually every picture you show followed the rule of thirds. You divide your canvas into 3 sections. You really see it here. There's 3 main foci that you look at. And also, the center of attention should be slightly off-center to be proper. And so it seems in some senses, while being very different in using available light and other respects, they were following the rules of composition quite closely. And also, the other thing that's a very New York thing is the emphasis on the vertical, which is just, with the rare exception of this one, they all emphasize the vertical. Even if it's a square thing, it's always the vertical. It's probably it makes sense just because of the space issues.
Right. Yeah, no, that's a nice observation. I mean, I don't have any particular documentation of them talking about, you know, what makes for a good composition. Whereas I do have evidence about other things, what makes for a good photograph.
You never get a sense of it even if they
I mean, the Photo League had a shared darkroom. So, you know, you were not alone developing and printing. And I'm just assuming if you're not alone, somebody's going to say, oh, that one looks good, right? Do that one. And you'll get people's comments as you're working on these images, so that you're, you know, it's not just an individual
choice of what's happening. You're learning from just the experience of actually developing the photos.
I'm just curious with this image and then the one following, I never saw the second one before.
Yeah.
I'm very familiar with this one.
This one's a classic.
It is, and I'm just wondering, did you get to go into art class and look at contact sheets and to see which one came first, or?
No, I wish I had for this, but the Levitt stuff it was very difficult. I found them in two separate places. The gallery, doesn't have a contact sheet on it. She had no family. She never married. She never had kids. A guy befriended her near the end of her life and took over, taking care of her stuff. And then he died during COVID, and so it's like, there's no archive. Most of these are in archives. Yeah. Many of them are being cared for by family members, children, nieces. It'd be nice if the stuff would get into archives.
And Howard Greenberg Gallery, he has a lot.
And Howard Greenberg, yes. I mean, 25 of the images come from Howard Greenberg. Right.
You can find out which one was first by looking at the cigarette.
Oh, that's a good idea. Oh, I like that. Shucks.
Can you repeat that? We don't understand.
Oh, he said you could find out which one came first by looking at the cigarette to see how much had been burned down or smoked, which is a great idea. Except that the other one's probably. Yeah. No, that was really good. And you come up with another one.
I'm sure you could get someone to like calculate the shadows on their head or something.
Yeah.
What is the man on the left side, the first guy on the left with the bald head?
Yeah.
What is he doing? I mean, I can't figure out what he's just staring at the other guy.
Hey, he's leaning forward and he's staring. Yeah. I mean, it's like, here he is.
There he is.
Yeah.
Looks like he could have been an athlete or a musician.
Yeah, I mean, that's why I
Maybe both.
Jack Williams said this is a deathbed. Yeah.
The guy with the hat looks like a gangster. Yeah. Big Louie or something.
Well, I mean, look, that was the style. He was really dressed. The wide lapels, the tie, the whole bit. That's New York style. He was very well dressed. I had one guy in Coney Island was up on the boardwalk. It was also unbelievably well dressed.
Well, thank you all for joining us.